Hi everybody. As I mentioned on Sunday, I wanted to do another little video helping us in our thinking about how we approach and understand the book of Ecclesiastes. It's kind of giving you some of the behind the scenes working that we wouldn't normally have time for within a sermon on a Sunday. And I thought it might be helpful just to explain some broad approaches to the whole book of Ecclesiastes and the kind of approach we're taking and the difference that can make. So, the first approach that is less common, but it does happen, and some commentaries will do this, is effectively to read most of the book as written by someone who is kind of unorthodox, that they're not saying what is right. What usually happens is they say that the introductory verses and the very last verses, they are written by an orthodox writer, someone who has the right view, but the majority of the book is written by someone who is doubting, who is skeptical, who has a wrong view of God, and so on. And so what they say then is not to be taken face value. In fact, we're to read it and we're to say, oh, he's wrong there. He hasn't understood this correctly, and so on. Its use, what the point of God doing that like that would be to say, he's given us this as an example of how you could think if you exclude God from the picture, if you get it wrong. It's an example of a twisted view of God. And so it's there effectively as a foil. We read it, we might say, well, he gets a couple of things right here and there, but basically we're going to disagree with him most of the time and use it as a foil to accentuate what we know is true. Now, I think God certainly could have done it like that, but to give us quite that much material, all of which is just a foil, I think is slightly strange. But also, quite a lot of the book, as I think we'll find as we go through it, is orthodox, is saying good and true things. And the introduction and the ending is not so very different. It does depend how you interpret them, but I think when you read the beginning and the end, you see consistency with what's in the middle. And so I don't see it as an orthodox person commenting on someone who's getting it wrong in the middle. That's the first view. The second view, I think, is probably much more common. And this is where people say that the guy writing is indeed orthodox, he gets things right, but he quite often adopts a position as if there wasn't God, or as if there wasn't kind of anything other than this world. So it's a kind of an assumed position that he takes. And sometimes people will point to particular phrases in the book to support this, particularly when he says things under the sun, all of the toil of mankind under the sun, or under the heavens. And what they say he's doing is he's saying, let's picture life under the sun in this created world, life just here as if without heaven, without God. And if we do, this is what we'll think about it. It'll be very depressing and miserable. We'll feel trapped in time and space. We'll be forgotten and so on. That's life under the sun. And then that too becomes a kind of foil, except this time the author himself knows what he's doing. And you say, oh, but it doesn't have to be like that. Actually, there is life beyond the sun. There's life above the heavens and so on. Now, I think that's got far more merit to it. But there are a couple of issues. The first is that those clues or markers under the sun, under the heavens, I just don't think they fall consistently to divide up the material to kind of go, here's an under the sun section. This is what life would be like if there wasn't God. Oh, and now I'll step out of that and give you a perspective with God. So it just doesn't divide the material up very neatly. And along with that, there are moments where he talks about his belief in God, where he talks about, like in chapter 3 we saw today, that we should do good, that we should fear God, that God will bring everything into judgment. And so you end up having to decide, well, when is he in which mode? But the text doesn't really seem to help us, I don't think, know when to switch. I think what you end up with actually with both of those positions when you read Ecclesiastes is you agree with the bits you already agree with, and you disagree with the bits that you think are wrong from elsewhere in the Bible. And while that's fine up to a point, what it means is Ecclesiastes won't ever really teach you anything you didn't know already. The third position, which we're adopting, which is taken by many commentators as well, is to say, no, this is written by someone who is orthodox, they're right in what they're saying, so we don't have to pick apart which bits are kind of wrongly framed. We assume he's right. He's not getting things wrong in what he says. We do assume, though, he is exploring life in a fallen world, and his focus then is different to other writers. That's why it has a different tone and feel. It is more kind of negative, but as I hope we'll see as we go through, the overall message of the book is actually positive. And we started to see some of that in chapter 3. God will bring things into judgment, so it is worth living for him now, and so on. And the end of the book in particular, where everything's kind of summed up, I think leans in that direction. If you read the end of chapter 12, the author there is positive about what the teacher has said. Said he's chosen good and almost beautiful words and expressed wisdom well, summed it up well for us, and sums up the whole message as living well for God in a fleeting world. The approach you take does connect a little bit with what we said in the last video about the word hevel, that word for breath. If you think that word is meaningless, then actually as you read a lot of the book, you say he's saying everything is meaningless. That tends to push you to one of the first two approaches, because we know things aren't meaningless, so that can't be all he's saying. If it means breath as a metaphor for fleeting, insubstantial, hard to get hold of, well, actually that could fit with all of the interpretations. It certainly fits with the last one that we've just mentioned. And this is then really significant in how we read Ecclesiastes as New Testament believers and how we connect it with the gospel message about Jesus. Under the first one, and to a certain extent under the second approach, the primary thing we see when we come to the New Testament is contrast. You say, he thought this, he thought it was meaningless without Jesus, and we know this. It's different for us now. But if you take the third approach, where you see the author simply exploring life in a fallen world, but looking to God within it, well, we still live in a fallen world. And so rather than it primarily being contrast, you see continuity. And we've drawn some of that out already. James 4 saying that our life is just a mist that disappears quickly, or Romans 8 saying that all of creation is subject to frustration and we groan. That's continuity with what we see in Ecclesiastes. And while our understanding of the gospel and new life in Christ, of course, changes how we live in a fallen world, it doesn't change the fact it is a fallen world. And so in chapter 3, for example, that there is a time to be born and a time to die, a time for love and a time for hate. That'll be our mixed experience in the world. So we're looking more for continuity than contrast. I should add that there will still be progression. We think we know more in the New Testament than the author of Ecclesiastes did. And so it's not that we just say he knew everything and there's nothing to add. No, we know more, but it's more a case of building on what he says rather than overturning what he says. Continuity more than contrast. So as we come to any passage, we're trying to wrestle with it from that angle. Now, I happily admit, some passages are tricky to understand, and sometimes it would feel quite a lot easier to say, oh, he's just wrong, he doesn't know what he's saying. But overall, that's the approach I'm convinced of from the reading and study I've done, and in chatting with the other elders. That's the approach we're taking in preaching. I think that's right, and that means Ecclesiastes has a voice for us. We don't have to decide whether we agree with him. We have to listen to him and see what he is teaching us. Of course, we'll think about how that connects with the New Testament, and indeed how the New Testament progresses and builds on it. But we'll hear his voice to us today. I hope that's of some help in thinking about how we approach the whole book of Ecclesiastes.